For nearly half a minute after the sword falls, a human head can remain painfully, impossibly conscious. Eyelids flutter, lips twitch, trying to shape final, silent words. For those 30 seconds, a mind is trapped, aware as its world slips into darkness. This grotesque interval almost certainly belonged to Anne Boleyn. Her fall from Queen of England to a traitor condemned to die wasn't just a political downfall. It was a masterpiece of psychological torture, choreographed by the man who once swore to love her, King Henry VIII. In Tudor England, execution wasn't merely a punishment. It was a brutal public performance, a final act of humiliation staged as carefully as a play. Anne's death was the climax of a calculated campaign to erase her, piece by piece, from power, from memory, and from history itself. By May 19, 1536, Anne had endured 17 days imprisoned within the Tower of London's cold stone walls, the same fortress that had once prepared her for a glorious coronation. Now it was her cage. Henry deliberately stretched her agony, postponing her execution date repeatedly. His decision to summon a master swordsman from France, often painted as an act of mercy, only heightened the suspense and the spectacle. It was a detail in a script he was writing. Yet, Anne played her part with unsettling calm. Witnesses described her as almost cheerful in her final hours, smiling and joking. She quipped about having but a little neck, turning her imminent beheading into macabre gallows humor. Modern psychology would call this dissociation, the mind's last fortress against unbearable trauma. Beneath the performance, her torment was immeasurable. She knew the charges, adultery, incest, plotting the king's murder, were outrageous lies, designed to strip her not just of her life, but of her very humanity. Henry wanted more than her death. He sought her total obliteration. Her accomplishments were to be discredited, her symbols scratched from palace walls, her daughter Elizabeth declared a bastard. The execution was the public finale to convince all of England that Anne Boleyn had never deserved to be queen. The morning of her death dawned uncharacteristically bright over London, a cruel, sunny contrast. Anne had been awake for nearly 24 hours, having spent the dark hours in desperate prayer. When guards finally came, she walked the hall she once ruled. No one bowed. Those who had flattered her now watched with cold indifference. Tower Green was set for the show. The scaffold was barely 3 feet high, a deliberate design to rob her of dignity, putting her on the level of the gawking crowd. The atmosphere was less a somber ritual and more a grim carnival, with planted hecklers ready to jeer. She was given the customary chance to speak. Every word was a tightrope walk. "Good people, I am come hither to die according to the law," she declared, a statement of submission that subtly refused to confess to the crimes themselves. It was a whisper of defiance from a woman whose voice was being permanently silenced. Notably, Henry was absent. He waited at Whitehall Palace, his thoughts not on the woman he was having killed, but on Jane Seymour, his next wife. Anne's death was a bureaucratic necessity, a box to be checked. The French swordsman stepped forward. His presence was another layer of cruelty, a stranger wielding an unfamiliar weapon, and knelt upright, following the French custom, requiring absolute stillness. Blindfolded, she could only listen for the sound of the blade being raised. The strike was clean, one precise swing. But the horror wasn't over. Witnesses reported her lips and eyes continued to move for several seconds, as if trying to finish that interrupted prayer. The gruesome sight caused onlookers to faint. The stubborn display of lingering life was the final, unscripted horror. Then, the ultimate indignity. No coffin had been prepared. Her weeping attendant scrambled to find an old arrow chest to hold her head and body. The woman crowned in Westminster Abbey was shoved into a makeshift box and buried in an unmarked grave beneath the chapel floor. But Henry's violence didn't end at the grave. He ordered her portraits destroyed, her initials carved from stone, her name scrubbed from court documents. The campaign to erase her from history had begun. The shadow of that morning stretched far. Her attendants, forced to clean her remains, were scarred for life. One fled to a convent. Her daughter, Elizabeth, not yet 3, was stripped of her title and left neglected, a toddler punished for her mother's crimes. Even the scene was sanitized for public consumption. Propagandists repackaged the expensive swordsman as an act of kingly compassion, the messy, bloody reality rewritten as a dignified exit. The most chilling detail? Henry became betrothed to Jane Seymour the very next day. Life at court rushed on without a pause. For the king, it was merely a problem solved. Anne's execution was a symphony of control. In her final weeks, she was isolated, sleep-deprived, and fed false information, psychological warfare designed to break her spirit. The execution itself was staged at mid-morning for maximum audience, surrounded by doubled guards to quash any sympathy. Days before, 5 men, including her own brother, had been executed on trumped-up charges, manufacturing a false narrative of guilt that left her defenseless. This was more than an execution. It was a state-sponsored demolition of a person, mind, body, and legacy. Yet, in the darkest irony, Henry's attempt to erase her failed spectacularly. The daughter he disowned, Elizabeth, would rise to become the iconic Virgin Queen, defining an age that bore her name. Anne's greatest legacy ultimately triumphed. The story of Anne Boleyn's death is not a simple tale of Tudor cruelty. It's a case study in how power operates when it is absolute, rewriting truth, manipulating reality, and turning a human being into a cautionary spectacle. It forces us to ask who gets to write history, and what happens when the truth becomes the first and most necessary victim. In the twitching silence of those 30 seconds, we hear more than the end of a queen. We hear a warning, echoing across 5 centuries, about the price of defiance and the terrifying fragility of truth itself.